A casual hoodie, a high-end showroom, and an unforgettable twist. What unfolds when the dealership manager misjudges the man, quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes? Daryl pulled into the lot of Prestige Motors, the crown jewel dealership he had recently taken ownership of in the sun-soaked city of Scottsdale, Arizona. The blazing desert sun danced off the polished exteriors of the luxury vehicles lining the entrance, their surfaces glowing like molten glass. Parking his understated SUV in a discreet spot toward the rear, he stepped out, surveying the showroom in search of Sod. He hadn't dressed to impress. Instead, he chose comfort, faded jeans, a worn gray hoodie, and well-used sneakers. It was intentional. He wanted to witness the dealership in its most authentic state, stripped of pretense, observing how the staff treated someone they believed to be just another curious customer. As he approached the glass doors, he could see a few employees chatting near the reception area, laughter and small talk floating faintly through the entrance. Upon stepping inside, the crisp coolness of the showroom wrapped around him, replacing the stifling heat outside. The air carried the luxurious scent of leather upholstery and freshly polished chrome. Rows of gleaming cars stood like works of art beneath the bright ceiling lights. As Daryl moved farther in, the ambient chatter faded. He noticed the side glances from staff members, subtle yet unmistakable, as their eyes traced his outfit and demeanor. A quiet tension stirred the air, one born of quiet assumptions. But Daryl wasn't here to jump to conclusions. He came to observe without filters. That's when she entered the scene. Susan, with her sharp features, commanding posture, and no-nonsense aura, she instantly conveyed seniority. Her crisp blazer, perfectly styled hair, and clipboard tucked neatly under one arm announced that she meant business. She approached him briskly, the sound of her heels echoing on the spotless floor. Her expression appeared professional at first, but there was a hint of forced cordiality hiding just beneath the surface. She addressed him with a practiced voice, smooth but slightly cold, asking if she could assist him. Daryl responded with an easy smile, mentioning he was simply browsing, motioning toward the cars. Susan examined him closely, her eyes scanning his outfit once more, the edge in her tone sharpening as she questioned whether he was seriously in the market for a car. Daryl, still composed, replied vaguely. Susan's response tightened with veiled skepticism, implying their vehicles weren't for everyone and hinting at the need for pre-approval. She was about to continue when a nearby co-worker interrupted, informing her that the delivery man had arrived. Her focus flickered, but her eyes quickly returned to Daryl, as if to ensure he stayed in her line of sight. He raised an eyebrow subtly, maintaining his relaxed tone. "You're suggesting I'm not qualified?" The question seemed to momentarily throw her off, but she quickly regained her footing, her posture becoming more rigid. "I'm just trying to be efficient," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "These cars begin at a high price point. Maybe I can point you towards something else." Daryl maintained his calm expression, though he took note of her words and the tone behind them. He remained poised, but the implication was clear, and it wasn't lost on him. A quiet moment followed, the air heavy with unspoken tension as Susan waited for his next move. Daryl turned his attention to the cars around him, letting his gaze settle on a striking silver coupe with a bold, modern design. He reached for the handle lightly, then glanced back at her. "Beautiful model," he remarked. Her brows drew together slightly, though she forced another smile. "It is. When you're serious about buying, we can arrange a proper appointment. In the meantime, please refrain from touching the inventory." He paused briefly, considering her words, then casually stepped back from the vehicle, placing his hands in his pockets. "All right, go ahead. What would you suggest for someone like me?" Susan blinked, taken aback by his directness. Before she could answer, Daryl continued, "I'm curious to hear what you think would be appropriate." The mask of politeness slipped for a moment, revealing a flicker of frustration. "Perhaps something more within reach," she offered. "I can recommend a dealership nearby that deals in pre-owned inventory." Daryl gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's a bold assumption," he said, his voice even. The words lingered in the air, and Susan hesitated for a moment before straightening her posture again. "I'll gather a few recommendations," she said, turning and walking away with a quick stride. Darrell watched her go without changing his expression, then turned back to the coupe, its mirror-like surface reflecting his composed demeanor. This visit was already proving revealing. Standing quietly in the heart of the showroom, he scanned the rows of polished vehicles. While he tried to remain open-minded, Susan's approach wasn't something he could easily overlook. Around him, the staff had resumed their earlier conversations, though he could still feel the occasional glance being cast his way, subtle but familiar. Susan returned shortly, holding her clipboard like a protective barrier. Her pace was brisk, her expression carefully composed, though a trace of irritation lingered. "I've put together some vehicles that may better fit your position," she announced, stopping just a short distance from him. Darrell tilted his head slightly. "My position?" "Yes," she replied sharply, handing him a list featuring used cars with modest price tags and practical features. These models are more budget-conscious, reliable, and well-suited for someone looking for functionality. Darrell took the sheet silently, his eyes skimming the listings: an aging sedan, a dated SUV, a small hybrid. A hint of amusement played at the corners of his mouth, but he quickly composed himself, folding the paper and slipping it into his pocket. "Thanks for putting this together," he said calmly. Susan seemed slightly thrown by his composed reaction, but she regained her posture, planting her hands on her hips. "Look," she began, lowering her voice as if offering a candid truth, "I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't a fit for everyone. I don't want you wasting your time." Darrell met her gaze, steady and unshaken. "And what makes you think I don't belong here?" he asked. Susan paused for just a beat. "I've been in this business for years. I can usually tell when someone isn't quite in the right place." Darrell's tone remained measured. "Fascinating," he said simply. There was a momentary flicker of doubt in Susan's expression, but she pressed forward. "I'm just being upfront. Better to be clear than have someone walk out disappointed." Darrell gave a quiet laugh and shook his head. "You value honesty? That's good. How about this? Why don't you let me talk to the owner? Think that could happen?" Susan's eyes widened, visibly surprised. "The owner?" "Yes," Darrell replied, still speaking casually. "I'd like a quick conversation." Susan forced a thin smile. "That's not going to be possible. The owner doesn't just show up unannounced. They're very busy." "I can imagine," Darrell said, nodding slightly. "But maybe you could give them a quick call. Let them know I'm here. I think they want to know." Susan's patience was clearly wearing thin, and her voice tightened. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be polite, but this is getting absurd. I have other clients to assist. If you're serious about making a purchase, we can set something up. Otherwise," her tone now firm and unmistakably tense, "I'll need to ask you to leave." The words settled in the room like a weight. Darrell didn't move, his eyes locked on hers. For a few seconds, the entire space felt still. Then, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. "No problem," he said, casually scrolling through his contacts. "I'll just reach out myself." Susan's brow creased. "What are you doing?" "Just contacting the owner directly," Darrell replied, lifting the phone to his ear. "Should only take a moment." Susan's composure began to crack, confusion now overtaking her irritation. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. All around them, employees had paused their tasks, now silently watching the moment unfold. Darrell raised a finger, a subtle gesture asking for patience, then turned slightly to speak into his phone. "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a bit of confusion. Could you inform them I'm here?" He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket, then turned to face Susan. "They'll be here soon," he said casually. Susan stared at him, stunned, her lips parted in disbelief. "Who? Who did you call?" Darrell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let his eyes sweep across the showroom, pausing on the staff who were now following every moment. "Guess we'll find out," he said, his voice carrying a calm, almost amused tone. The atmosphere in the room grew thick, the anticipation pressing down like a weight. Susan shifted uncomfortably, her usual poise beginning to fade. The minutes ticked by, though time felt suspended. She busied herself with her clipboard, though her movements were mechanical, betraying her unease. Meanwhile, Darrell stood effortlessly composed near a luxury SUV, his demeanor adding a quiet tension to the scene. A few employees whispered among themselves, sneaking glances toward him, clearly aware that something significant was happening. Then the quiet was broken by the soft sound of the main entrance opening. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, his polished shoes tapping rhythmically against the tiled floor. His face was serious, but his eyes lit up when they landed on Darrell. "Mr. Carter," he said warmly, offering his hand as he approached. "Great to see you." Darrell met the handshake with calm assurance, a faint smile on his face. "Thanks for coming, Alex. Really appreciate it." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Susan's grip on her clipboard faltered, her expression changing rapidly from confusion to visible distress as her eyes darted between the two men. "Mr. Carter?" she repeated, her voice unsteady. Alex turned toward her, his professional tone now noticeably firmer. "So I see you've already been introduced to Mr. Carter." Susan's mouth opened, then closed, as if searching for something to say. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize he owns this dealership," Alex said firmly, cutting in. Then he looked at Darrell with a note of regret in his expression. "I imagine this isn't the welcome you expected." Darrell lifted a hand gently, his tone composed. "It's all good, Alex. Seems Susan and I just had a bit of a rocky start." His words were calm, but carried a weight that held everyone's attention. Susan's face lost all color as she instinctively stepped back, clutching her clipboard to her chest like it was something to hold on to. Her voice trembled, barely audible, as she muttered an apology. "I am sorry. I truly didn't know." "Didn't know what exactly?" Darrell asked, his tone still composed but carrying quiet weight. "That someone like me couldn't possibly be the one running this place? That I couldn't belong here?" Her expression shifted, eyes wide, a trace of confusion and regret washing over her. "I didn't mean—" Darrell gently raised a hand to stop her. "It's all right, Susan. Really." He moved in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to draw everyone's attention. "But let me ask you something. If I hadn't been the owner, would I have been treated the same? Would I have received the same level of respect as someone who walked in here wearing a tailored suit and an expensive watch?" Susan opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was thick and revealing. Darrell gave a small nod, as if her silence said more than words ever could. He turned to Alex, his voice gaining a firmer, more assertive tone. "Let's get everyone together in the conference room. I think it's time we talk seriously about the values and standards we want to uphold here." Soon, the staff filed into the dealership's sleek, modern conference space, an impressive room with glass walls and elegant finishes, but today it felt heavy with tension. Susan sat near the back, her usual confident presence replaced by a quiet unease. Darrell stood confidently at the front, his calm demeanor demanding focus. Alex took a position near the entrance, his arms crossed, watching the room settle. As the final whispers died down, Darrell cleared his throat and began to speak, his tone direct but steady. "Thank you for making time on such short notice. My name is Darrell Carter, and as of last month, I took over ownership of Prestige Motors." A few soft murmurs rippled through the group, some surprised, others clearly unsettled. Susan sat lower in her chair, her eyes fixed on the table. "I showed up today, dressed the way I did for a reason," Darrell continued. "I wanted to see how this place operates when no one is aware of who I am. I wanted to understand what an ordinary visitor experiences when they step into this showroom." He paused, letting the weight of that intention settle across the room. "And what I found was disappointing. I wasn't judged on what I knew or what I was capable of. I was judged on appearance alone. I'm not here to single anyone out or make an example of someone. But we need to have a serious conversation about the culture we're building within these walls." Darrell's gaze briefly moved toward Susan, then shifted back to the group. "This moment isn't just about me," he added. "It was about more than just him. It was about every person who stepped through those doors, Every potential customer who didn't match someone's narrow expectations of what a luxury buyer should look like. One of the younger sales reps tentatively raised his hand, and Daryl gave a nod of permission. The man spoke with hesitation, saying that while most of them did their best to be fair, sometimes it was hard not to form assumptions. Daryl listened, his face thoughtful, then acknowledged the truth in those words. He explained that biases exist in all of us, whether we recognize them or not. But the key isn't just trying to be fair. It's making a conscious effort to challenge those biases. It's about creating an environment rooted in respect, where everyone feels welcomed regardless of how they look or where they come from. He paused for effect, letting his message land. Prestige Motors had a long-standing reputation for quality, but true excellence went beyond just selling high-end cars. It was about the overall experience, and from this point forward, that experience would be built on fairness, inclusivity, and mutual respect. A quiet wave of agreement moved through the room, though not everyone seemed fully convinced. Daryl's eyes settled on Susan, who remained still in her seat, hands tightly clasped. He addressed her directly, his voice firm but not aggressive, asking if she wanted to say anything. All eyes turned to her. After a moment of silence, she admitted her mistake, her voice low and face flushed, expressing genuine regret for misjudging him. Daryl gave a slight nod, acknowledging her words without expressing judgment. He reminded the group that this moment wasn't only about her, but a lesson for them all. Change begins with accountability. He then announced that new training initiatives would be implemented to align the team with the values he intended to uphold. Every person who walked into the dealership deserved dignity and respect, without exception. He invited anyone who disagreed to speak now, but no one did. The silence that followed was powerful. After a long pause, Daryl resumed speaking, this time with a calm resolve. He was pleased that no one had spoken up in objection. Change could be uncomfortable, but it was necessary, and Prestige Motors would lead by example. He leaned slightly over the table, stating clearly that his intention wasn't to embarrass anyone, but to better understand the culture he'd inherited and improve it. His attention shifted once again to Susan. He softened his tone to let her know this wasn't an attack. He recognized the work she had done to get where she was, but today had been a moment of reckoning, not only for her, but for everyone in the room. She looked up and met his gaze, her voice unsteady but sincere as she admitted she'd been wrong and was willing to make it right. Daryl responded by saying he believed in second chances, but that accountability would always come first. He let her know they'd meet privately to talk about the path forward. Then, addressing the whole team once more, he reminded them they weren't just selling cars. They were building relationships, earning trust, and standing for something greater. If they shared that vision, he'd be there to support them. This time, the murmurs of agreement were louder and carried genuine conviction. Even Alex, who had been silent throughout, gave a nod of approval. Daryl allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, one that reflected both his relief and his renewed drive. He wrapped up the meeting with a simple reminder. How they treated people would always matter more than what they sold. As the staff began to leave the room, Susan lingered near the doorway. She walked up to him quietly, her hands fidgeting. In a low voice, she thanked him for giving her the chance to improve, promising she wouldn't let him down. Daryl looked at her seriously, then replied with steady clarity. He hoped her words were sincere, because what truly mattered were the actions that followed. Still, he believed people could change if they genuinely tried. She nodded, clearly committed. As she walked away, Daryl turned to Alex, requesting a staff meeting be scheduled for the following week to reinforce expectations. Alex smiled, his respect evident, and confirmed the plan. As Daryl stepped back onto the showroom floor, the sunlight bounced off the pristine vehicles, casting reflections across the space. He thought about the road ahead. There would be challenges, but for the first time that day, he felt confident. This was about more than managing a dealership. It was about building a culture of integrity, and he was ready to lead that transformation.